What if this world is actually a giant prison? When the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer observed the amount of pain we experience throughout our lives, he concluded that it's not happiness or pleasure we seek, but rather a reduction of the constant suffering that is an inherent part of existence. When we compare this world to a prison, more specifically a penitentiary, and look through the dark lens of Schopenhauer's philosophy, the similarities are striking. Just like in a prison, no one really chooses to be here. We can't leave until our sentence ends or until our life runs out. We're confined by the walls of the fleeting present moment, and within those limits, we often experience a stream of suffering, tragedy, worry, and misery. We humans jump from one pleasure to another, just to feel temporary relief from pain. In the process, the organisms that inhabit Earth, driven by what Schopenhauer called the will to live, feed on one another in an attempt to prolong their miserable lives a little longer. Like prison gangs, the species of the world are locked in a constant battle for dominance. Eat or be eaten seems to be the natural order. When we see how plants, as well as certain animals, exist only to serve as food for others, and how those animals, in turn, fall prey to the destructive presence of humans, it's clear that humanity also exploits its own kind and drains its natural habitat of resources, while at the same time being victims of diseases or disasters. Schopenhauer's worldview is one of agony, devoid of divine grace, having more in common with a penal colony than with the creation of a benevolent deity. Seeing the world as a prison may sound like a recipe for personal misery, so why not adopt a more positive and hopeful perspective? Why be so pessimistic about it? Well, Schopenhauer's idea comes with a twist. Inside his pessimistic worldview, there's a secret that can actually benefit humanity. Based on his essay on the sufferings of the world, this video explores Schopenhauer's pessimistic view of life and reveals his secret. He claimed that, contrary to what many think, it's not pleasure, but pain, that is the positive element of existence. He argued that evil makes its presence known, and is, therefore, something tangible. Good, on the other hand, is negative. Happiness and contentment are nothing more than a desire fulfilled, or the end of some form of pain. In this way, the experience of pain is the source of our desires and needs. Hunger, for example, is a state of discomfort that can become painful, driving us to want food. So, eating isn't actually a positive experience. It's only considered pleasurable because it satisfies a desire that comes from pain, in other words, a feeling of lack. According to Schopenhauer, pain far outweighs pleasure in this world. The pleasure we feel is often less satisfying than we expected, while pain, on the other hand, is much more intense. He didn't just call life a disappointment, but also a trick. Life gets more painful as we age, as we face tragedy after tragedy, and become more prone to illness and death. Even when we're young and idealistic, the world seems full of promise, but eventually our high hopes fade, and we end up disappointed and unhappy by the hardships that fall upon us. We face insecurity, loss, betrayal, physical pain, and even mutilation. We realize that life isn't all rainbows and sunshine, and that happily ever after is rare. That dream home, the fat savings account, or the interesting social circle aren't enough to console the immense pain of being trapped on this desolate rock called Earth. In fact, the fulfillment of all our desires and the constant suppression of desire through pleasure leads to boredom, which is just another form of dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer's worldview leaves no room for optimism. Life is a burden, the result of some misstep or sin for which we are paying the price. Schopenhauer compares us to lambs in a field, watched by a butcher who decides who will be next. Powerless over our fate, we can only wait, trapped by life itself until the next misfortune strikes. Some choose to escape this cycle of misery by checking out early, while others keep doing what they've always done, which is to console themselves with pleasures. We drink to forget past sorrows and give ourselves to distractions, so we don't get consumed by worries about the misfortunes yet to come. Like prisoners, we try to make our sentence more bearable by minimizing pain. As dark as it may seem, this is the reality Schopenhauer wants us to embrace. If you're looking for a reliable guide to navigate life and banish all doubts about how to face it, get used to seeing the world as a penitentiary, a kind of penal colony. In Schopenhauer's view, it's the very understanding and acceptance of the human condition, no matter how grim it is, that holds the key to a more compassionate life. When we look around, we see competition, intolerance, and even hatred between individuals and groups. Life is already hard enough, but we make it even harder for one another. We are relentless about other people's bad actions. We hate our enemies for causing us pain, and we're overly critical of those who make mistakes. But isn't this animosity misplaced, considering that, in the end, the same tragic fate awaits us all? Being alive, being human, and being part of a world that works against us has a lot in common with being in a prison. The flaws of humanity, to which we all belong, are the same ones we get so upset about in others. These flaws aren't just on the surface. They exist deep within us, ready to emerge at any moment. If we accept this view of life and recognize that we all share the same anxieties, insecurities, sufferings, physical pain, and unrest, we can adjust our expectations accordingly. Events that are usually seen as bad aren't unusual or unexpected, but are logical consequences of a life rooted in misfortune. For example, when someone is rude to us, we can imagine how tormenting life must have been for that person so far, and understand that their rudeness is to be expected and shouldn't be taken personally. They're prisoners just like us, waiting for the next beating from the guards, and eventually, their execution. Unless they've managed to transcend the suffering that comes with life, it's understandable that people don't always behave in the best way possible. Schopenhauer also points out that his pessimistic perspective creates an opportunity for compassion. This is the secret. Compassion is the ability to gather sympathy and concern for the suffering or misfortunes of others. Considering how much misfortune life brings, and the fact that no one ever chooses to be here, we can safely say that compassion is the right response. Furthermore, Schopenhauer believed we should have compassion for our fellow humans, as it is essential for our own well-being. From compassion flows our willingness to help one another, our ability to accept each other's imperfections, and our inclination to make this collective prison more bearable. Schopenhauer invites us to change the way we see each other, not as enemies, but as fellow sufferers. This might sound strange, but it's aligned with the facts. It casts others in the right light and reminds us of what is, after all, the most necessary thing in life: tolerance, patience, consideration, and love for others, which we all need, and therefore owe to each other.